morning, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed your previous sessions related to well-being and the future of work. We have just started our Digital HR Day, and now we're heading on to designing human-centric experiences, but of course in a digital way. As you know, a lot of trends have had an impact on how we design the human experiences within organizations and how we blend physical and digital channels to drive employee engagement. Given that we don't know much about the human-centric digital HR experiences, this case study is an excellent opportunity, of course, to learn more about this. I'd like to welcome to this session an organizational psychologist who has a passion for HR and 12 years of experience in this industry, if I'm right, and I hope I am. Dr. Veldsman is an expert, HR expert, and of course, the leader of AI HR. So, Dr. Dieter, good morning, and are you ready to start your session?
Good morning, Alexandra, and good morning to everybody on the line. Yes, very excited to get started. All right. Alexandra, you can just give me a
Is the sound okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Perfect. Alexandra, can I kickstart from my side? Can you hear me?
Good luck.
All right. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here with you this morning, and I'm very excited to share the topic that lies very close to my own heart. And you can see from the title this morning, what we are going to look at really is around how do we make sure that when we design digital journeys and experiences for HR, that we also consider the human element. And what I would like to take you through in the next 20 minutes or so is just a little bit of context. So how do we think consumerism is changing what we do in HR? And how has that led to the rise of the digital era? And what I would like to focus on this morning is really, but what does this mean for us as HR professionals in our practices? What we'll also then do is really to look at when we design digital experience journeys, what does human-centric design look like, and how do we need to think differently about that? I'd like to spend most of this morning then on a case study of an organization, and that's just a pseudo name, Magic Enterprises, they are a global insurance business. And I'd like to step you through how they applied this type of thinking into their own HR environment and some of the results and some of the differences that they are starting to see in terms of employee engagement. And then lastly, I'd like to end really with a bit of a call to action and a challenge to everybody on the line this morning around how you can start this particular journey in your own organization. So let's get started with some of the trends that are really influencing how we view HR and how we apply these trends in our own organizations. The first one, just running through it, and I'm not going to say too much about this. I think really the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. What I want to highlight here is just the acceptance that work is going to look different and that technology and work needs to augment each other in terms of the human experience and how we can bring those two different facets together. The second one there is, I think we are in the phase of preparing for a post-COVID workplace, really asking questions. And I think some of the other speakers have spoken already about what does well-being look like? What does holistic well-being look like in this workforce and workplace? And that also leads us then to understand there's a continuum that we are going to have to look at from a work point of view around specific time and place versus anytime, anywhere dynamics. And this is influencing how people work, where people work, as well as what they expect from an employer. And then the last trend, which is very relevant for us this morning, is I think we've shifted as human beings to really start thinking about consumer-led experiences. Take your own life at the moment. The moment that you buy something from a provider or from a vendor, you want it personalized, you want it targeted to your own needs, wants, and desires. And the expectation is that it's a good experience that you have when you engage with them, either via their digital platform or via one of their other channels as well. And HR is not unique in this regard. A lot of employees are starting to ask the question to say, why, when I deal with other organizations as a customer or a consumer, the experience is so much better when dealing with, as opposed to dealing with my own HR environment internally. And I think that's something that we really have to take to heart. So how's this influenced HR? And you can see from, and this is very familiar to most people on the line this morning, HR has always responded to what was happening in the external environment. So for example, second industrial revolution, we saw the rise of manufacturing, and that led to the role of HR being more of a welfare officer in a policy era. So looking at what are the things we need to put in place to optimize human capital in organizations. Where we are now, I think that in the post-COVID world and with the trends that I've just mentioned, we are going to slowly but surely start shifting into this digital business advisor role around asking and helping our organizations understand how do we bring digital and human experience together in order to be able to drive human capital in the organization. And I think that is going to change a little bit around how we think about HR. My personal view is I think our view of an employee will change. We will definitely start viewing the employee as a consumer of an HR product and HR service delivery, as opposed to being a participant in the process. And I think this is very important for us to understand. What does it mean when we start saying the implications that the employee is now a consumer and no longer just a participant? And I think the first thing that we have to consider and think about there is you have to ask the question to your employees, if they had a choice, would they buy it? When they engage with your HR solutions and your HR products internally, if they had another choice, would they still do it? And I think it's such a guiding question to be able to understand their behavior. The second one, would they come back and buy it again? Typically trying to see whether once they've experienced it, do they actually want to engage here again? Especially where we start talking about things that is very personalized, like career experiences and career platforms. Is the consumer or the employee actually going to utilize that over time? The third question we need to ask is, would they recommend the solution to people they care about? I always try to measure, it's not about telling your colleagues, it's about telling other people about the great work and the experiences that you've had internally in the organization. So can we honestly say, when somebody has put in leave, when somebody has gone through a digital learning journey with us, that's actually something that they would talk about to the people that they care? And lastly, did the end experience or the end-to-end experience meet the expectations of a real human being? Now, I ask this question because I think as HR, what we've often done is we've kind of stepped into that mode around thinking about the process, thinking about the practice, and getting it done as efficiently as possible, and then neglecting to say, but hang on, at the end of this policy, this process, this technology solution, there's a real human being, and what are they thinking at the moment? What do I want them to do, and what do I want them to feel with what I'm putting on the table as well? And this will lead us to really start thinking about the consumer of the solution in a different way. So we have to then start keeping the following things in mind. The first one is, I think when we build practices, our shift has to be from efficiency and effectiveness, the example I've just used, to what is the engagement and the experience that I want to create through this particular practice. Now, this has got quite a significant implication because it means that some things might actually be a little slower, but it will provide a better and more engaging experience. And think about these things when you start talking about candidate journeys, attracting people as part of your talent attraction process, learning journeys. And I think that's a fundamental shift to the way that we are currently doing things. The next component in terms of technology, I think we're going to shift from high-touch tech delivery, where technology only enables, to really start thinking and intentionally designing for the memorable moments that lives on a platform that gets improved over time. And I think it will become this continuous evolution where we start looking at the human experience and start saying, what is next? What is next? What is the next component that we need to look at? And this in the context then of a continuous conversation between the employee and the employer, and how we start building in some of those different feedback loops. The third one there really is the employee focus, and I've mentioned this already, to say really shifting from seeing the employee as a receiver of services to really shifting to the employee as the consumer of a product. And keep those questions in mind. Would I buy it? Would I buy it again? Would I tell other people about it? And is it really designed for a real human being to utilize and be part of this experience? So how do you do this? And I would like to step you through the methodology, and then I'm going to apply it to our case study and showcase to you how this global organization applied this methodology to rethink all their HR practices. And it's actually quite a straightforward, logical process that you need to go through, but it does require you to start thinking outside in. Now, what do I mean by outside in? It means starting to put yourselves in the shoes of the consumer that you are building for. The first question that you have to ask in this methodology is understand why. Why does this experience matter? And this is such an important question because ultimately this experience has to matter to the organization on the one side, as well as to the employee or the consumer on the other side. And it is important to understand what is going to be the output and the success of this particular experience. What are we looking to do? What are we looking to do? What do we want to see happen as a result of this experience? We also then have to ask the question, who? Who is it that is involved in this particular experience? And there, to utilize diagnostic methods, we would always recommend utilize both qualitative and quantitative methods to start understanding at a very broad level who's the consumer and segmenting them, but then also diving deep to understand the real needs that this consumer have of you as an organization in this process. We utilize personas, and this is really just a way to represent our workforce and to describe our workforce through a persona lens of a real human being. And I'll show you in a moment how Magic Enterprises applied this so that we can identify particular characteristics that we want to focus on for this particular persona in terms of their wants, their needs, and their desires. After that, we have to define what. So what should this experience look like? What are our touch points in this experience? And there's three guiding questions that we follow here. The first one is, what do we want this consumer to think when they engage with us? What do we want them to feel? And what do we want them to do? And those three questions really guide every single touch point to say, but what is the outcome of this touch point in the journey? What is the outcome of this touch point in the journey? And really bringing those things together towards the next question to say, but how are we going to do this? How do we shape this experience and how do we measure it? So here we start looking then at the physical and digital touch points, and they will always complement each other. And really to ask the question to say, where is that interaction and that moment that we want to create? And how does technology enable that? How does digital drive that? But how do we not lose the human touch that I think is so crucial to not forget in any of these processes? We have to make the consumer feel like this has been designed for them, for their needs, for their wants, for the things that they want to do in the organization. And that will then touch on different elements of both the process and the system. A key part in this conversation, however, is the continuous measurement of the employee voice. Hearing as employees go through these different journeys and these different experiences, what is it that they are actually thinking, feeling, and doing? And how can we utilize this continuous insight to review, revise, and realign this process into an iterative logic that we keep on applying in the organization as we mature our digital journeys? So let's look at what this looks like in practice. And as I've mentioned before, Magic Enterprises, the global insurance organization, they've got 16 plus employees. They operate in eight countries. And majority of their employees, which I think is important to understand, sits in either sales or operational roles. They are distributed as a workforce. And the first question they ask to understand why does this experience matter and determining who is our workforce? And they created 5 personas that's actually representative of 85% of the individuals that live within their organizational systems. So you can see the names there on the screen, and what they try to understand is who are they? And I'll use the example. Imenati was an African female, 34 years old, 1 to 2 children. She's just completed her studies. She's been with the organization 2 to 5 years. And what she wants from the organization is, what is my next step? How do I create stability for my family? And probably Imenati at that stage in her career, also still looking for growth opportunities. And that was one of the personas that they had created. The question they next asked is, what is their context? And here I'll use an example of Carol. Carol, in terms of her context, an older employee in the organization. She was 62, 63 in her final career stage. Her context is that she's starting to think about what goes beyond my current employment relationship. What does that mean for me as an individual, and how am I going to drive it? And they also then ask the question, but what do they want from work? Imenati wants career growth. Carol wants stability. And how can we cater for these different needs through the digital journeys that we design? And lastly, what do they expect from an employer? What would make them say that this is an employer that I want to stay with and remain? And various insights was gathered by utilizing qualitative data, so interviews with employees that fall within these categories, and quantitative data to start looking at things like demographics, location, and cultural trends that they could incorporate into these profiles. The outcome here was really these 5 profiles, and they used them as a lens in any HR practice that they then designed. And I'm going to use this example of defining the what as their recruitment, selection, induction, and onboarding experience map. The first step is they would take all 5 personas and put them through these phases of what happens in brand awareness, what happens in our first interaction, what happens when we select, what happens around the career decision, our connection, and how do we ensure that this persona is engaged and empowered to be able to be successful in the organization. They unpack these experience map for each of these personas, so you will have 5 of them, and then they would define the think, feel, and do factors for each of these personas. And in this example, so for brand awareness, the experience we want to create there is this is a place where I like to work. I like the brand. I think the brand stands for something that I can believe in, and I actually want to apply. And that's a think, feel, and do elements of the experience that needs to be created for that persona within brand awareness. The next step then is to talk about, but where are these touch points? So how does this process run, and how are we going to enable that? And here's where I think smart digital design has to come in terms of how we do these things at scale. The next step here is then really to start plotting and mapping that out. And as you can see from the slide, what they did was to say, what is our digital touch points for this persona within each of these different steps? So looking at firstly, the digital touch point, where there's a physical touch point that we want to create, and how do these different things influence each other to provide a holistic experience. It's my firm belief that digital has to be complemented by memorable moments with face-to-face or online or virtual interaction. And to do that intentionally, you have to map out the employee experience map in terms of what that digital journey would look like and what it would entail. The next step here was really for them to be able to say, now that we understand the journey and we are busy unpacking the how, what does this thing look like and how does it show up to the actual consumer sitting on the other end? And this is an example of what the consumer would see. So they built a digital platform, building in personalization insights based on the personas that they had created. And as you can see here, it guides the consumer and the user through, and this example I'm showing you now is their first step around their personal development plan. Really engaging with them, helping them understand, but from where do I now navigate? And also over time, introducing certain personalization options around what is important to me as a consumer, depending on where I fall and within our persona profiles. This was later then expanded, as I've mentioned, to be able to add some personal information. We talk about the concept of stored content. If you think about why you won't delete your Instagram account, it's because you've put things into it. And this is the exact same thing. How do we hook people into the technology in a responsible way to optimize their experience? And that kind of grew over time to also then come into other employee-focused platforms. This one looks at how do they manage their careers and how do they navigate that going forward, as well as then also looking at particular learning opportunities for them within the organization. And all this was based on really the thinking around, but what is important for this persona? That also then led towards the design of putting these things in ways that would matter to the employee. So through things like total reward statements, touching on those specific needs and driving this as a digital product for the employee, as well as then later on actually personalizing it into an app which was called the Human Hub, where an employee could go in and really customize their experience that they have with the organization when engaging with the HR domain. And lastly, which I thought was really, really nice, was an interactive chatbot that was then built to be able to help employees based on the data that has been gathered with some basic HR services. And that was personalized over time as it got smarter and smarter and smarter to provide this very personalized, real-time, on-time service to employees. But that's not enough. And I think this is a point I really do want to stress, is to say that you also have to listen then to what employees are saying. And you'll remember in the methodology I've just showed, the voice of the employee and the measurement becomes critical. And what the organization did here, Magic Enterprises, is to actually implement short 1 or 2 question pulse type of surveys at key moments that matter and really ask the questions around think, feel, and do. And it was shaped in such a way that there's continuous data collection that they could pull real time to be able to understand, are we really creating the experience that we've set out to create? And is it really working for the consumer on the other side? And I must say, some of the insights when working with them that we got by just asking the question was significant in terms of doing things like performance management in a very different way. And where some of the elements got stuck around the experience of the employee and how we could address that through some of the design going forward as well. So what does this mean? And I think this is really where I want to stress the fact and start talking about what is our call to action. If we want to be successful in designing human-centric digital experiences, the first thing we have to do is to adopt a consumer-driven approach to people practices. And what that means is to see people as real human beings. I always tease the organization when we work with them to say, but think human first. apply that principle and say, but if I have to think about the human first, what would I do? Is this the same thing that I would do? What are their wants, needs? And that's where we use some of the persona insights and some of the data that we've gathered. The second component is we have to be very comfortable to shift our approach. And I mentioned that in terms of practices and technology design, from only looking at efficiency and effectiveness to really looking at engagement and experience. I'm not saying efficiency and effectiveness is not important. I'm just saying that we have to look at that in the context of the experience that we also want to create. It was very insightful for me to say, if we have to weigh up something happens faster or something happens in a meaningful way, depending on what's important to that persona, you might make a different decision in terms of how you set that up in your digital environment. One of the most notable examples I can use here was really in the benefits environment for this organization. So when they looked at creating memorable moments, they saw, particularly when dealing with things like medical aid and pension fund, that those moments are actually very emotive. And they started looking at this to say, but how do I manage the emotive experience of the employee? And yes, maybe that is a little bit slower, but they're going to remember us for the way that we cared in that moment, as opposed to the quick processing time. And how do we balance these conflicting priorities? The next one, this is a little bit new for us. I think we sometimes get so stuck in getting things done and running around and fighting fires. This approach does call to take a step back. It does call to also be able to help your business along this particular journey and help them understand. And the easiest way to do this is to use some examples around how we deal with clients, external clients as an organization, and bring those principles in-house. For example, in Magic Enterprises, they understood that their clients typically have 3 interactions with them. The first one is a cognitive interaction. Do I want to buy a policy? The second one is an emotive interaction. Something in my life has happened and I need to amend my policy. Or the third one was actually something bad happened and I need to claim. And using that logic, they were able to say, but why don't we treat our internal consumer in the same way? And that helped them shift the business mindset towards thinking about the employee as a bit of a consumer, as opposed to just a participant. The fourth one there is really around we need to be in constant conversation with the consumer. This isn't one of those things, and I think one of the big trends we're starting to see in HR is that the project thinking needs to go out of the door and be a lot more around product thinking, where we start thinking about products in incremental value that we provide to employees. Out of our Magic Enterprises example, the chatbot is a very good example. It launched with very, very limited functionality. And then based on the feedback gathered from employees, it steered the course of what would be developed next and how would that evolve over time, to make sure that it remained relevant to the consumer and that next step in the product journey was actually managed based on real user feedback and not just the perception of the organization. And then lastly, to be successful at this type of approach, we need to evolve it. We need to get extremely comfortable that we will hit particular milestones, but maybe we're not done. And I think we need to be able to help our organization understand that there will be a version 2, a version 3, a version 4, a version 5. Now, one of the key mistakes I've seen organizations make in this space is that they never get to version 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the advice here is rather be focused, do less and do it better and deeper, and take your time to understand the consumer first, because that will guide a lot of your actions later on in the process as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to summarize really what we spoke about this morning. And it's firstly to say, and to ask this question to you and your own organization, if I had to ask your humans to rate your digital consumer experience that they have with engaging with the organization or with HR, what would they say? What would be their feedback? And are we really thinking human first when we start thinking about our digital journeys in the organization as well? I think we can make a significant contribution here as HR professionals and experts, but it's going to require us to shift our own mindset and to start thinking about human experience and not just efficiency and effectiveness. Thank you very much. It's been really great to share these thoughts with you. And I hope it's useful in your own organizations to be able to get started in designing your own journeys. Alexandra, back to you.
Right, so since we did that, I can see here it's totally more than you guys begin with the day.
Hi, sorry, I can't hear anything, Alexandra.
Is it now okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. I can hear you
Yeah.
now. Thanks so much,
Yeah,
Alexandra.
okay, great. I wanted to say congratulations on your presentation. It was beautiful. It was very structured and very detailed. And I want to apologize for my connection with internet this morning. I really hope I made a beautiful introduction, and I hope that you hear me. So this is a wonderful session. We have a couple of questions from the audience, and of course, luckily we have time to answer. So just give me a second to read them. One of the questions was, given that it is up to HRs to design digital experiences for employees, for those of us who are unsure on whether we can do it successfully, what skill sets should we try to obtain in order to prepare for this?
Sure. I think there's a few skill sets, and we often talk about the T-shaped HR professional at AIHR. The first one is, I think, get into the minds of your consumer by being able to work with data and being able to gather data and interpret that and translate that into a meaningful insight. The second one is, and I think that's the good news, is I think a lot of things that HR already knows really helps with this process. Take it logically, take these steps that I spoke about this morning and utilize that with some of your own strengths. Active listening, make sure that you really hear the consumer, create a safe space and environment that they're able to give you the feedback around what's going to make the difference. And then start thinking about some design thinking techniques, in terms of mapping those journeys, those experiences, and follow that think, feel, and do approach. And then you're halfway there. And I promise you, you will figure it out as you go along as well. And there's a lot of really good support materials that can also guide you on this journey.
Thank you. I just saw that our time is up. Unfortunately, I thought we had more time.
Sure.
However, I invite the audience to contact you on LinkedIn if it's okay to ask you further questions on this topic. Once again, congratulations from my side, and huge thanks to AIHR for supporting the event. It's also great to have you here. So the last call for all the audience to visit the AIHR booth in our expo zone. And moving on to the next session, Mr. Dieter, thank you once again. It was a wonderful session.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the week.
Of course, enjoy the day. Thank you.